I was determined that the black man would not continue to be kicked about, as I had seen in Central America and as I had read of it in America. Where is the black man's government? Where is his king and his kingdom? Where is his president, his country, his men of big affairs? I could not find them, and then I declared, I will help to make them. My brain was afire.
It must have been hell to see and to feel and to cry, in pain, in denial, before the rebel is born out of a man. Marcus Garvey was a hero, crying amidst the dense darkness of the hellish treatment witnessed by him against his people. The man, Garvey, had seen and embraced the distinct fact that every human called black is one, for they were all treated alike. And because they were all treated alike, they have got to come together by every means constructively necessary to help themselves out.
You was oppressed and depressed and disgusted that you were born in the wrong race of people because of your color. Whatever was left, that's what you got. Only what was left. And we were at the lowest ebb at that time. The black people was.
When we'd walk along the plank walks, they didn't have sidewalks here in New Orleans at that time, but you'd walk along the plank walk. But if a white person came along, no matter who it was, a white child, a white man, a white woman, if they came along, you had to get off the plank walk and stand in the mud until they passed.
And now we are going into details on Marcus's activities and the ingredients that spurred him on and compelled the radicalization of his philosophy and vision for his black brothers and sisters. Only sit back with a dispassionate view, and let's all walk into that part that Marcus Garvey cried so hard about for a moment. Support our works by hitting on that like button in front of you. Share with your families and friends to keep spreading our eye-opening black narrative, and kindly subscribe to stay with us for more interesting updates, whilst you also help in building the rising membership of this channel. Let us delve in. On July 2nd, 1917, just months after America's entry into World War I, the city of East St. Louis had exploded with the worst racial riot the country had ever seen. 39 whites and hundreds of African Americans had been killed that day.
You have black troops going off to fight to make the world safe, democracy in April, and in July you have black people being murdered in the most wanton and barbaric manner in East St. Louis, you know, children being thrown back into flaming houses, people being boarded up in their houses before they're torched. So even by American standards, East St. Louis was a horror.
W.E.B. Duboy, leader of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, and a supporter of integration, led a silent march in response to the mass killing. But to Garvey, this was no time for silence already. It was time for black people to get together and fight back. Thus he had spoken out at an emergency meeting in Harlem.
The whole thing, my friends, is a bloody farce. That the police and soldiers did nothing to stem the murder thirst of the mob is conclusive proof of conspiracy on the part of the civil authorities to condone the acts of the white mob against Negroes. White people are taking advantage of black men today because black men all over the world are disunited.
It is that speech that marks the turning point of Garvey away from Jamaica, away from a preoccupation with matters related to the West Indies. And now he's not looking for support for what he is hoping to accomplish in the West Indies, but rather he is now sucked into the vortex of American race relations.
Even though I had a great deal of admiration for W.B. Du Bois and A. Philip Randolph and other black leaders of the time, I thought that their approach to our problems was too doggone tame, and that we needed to have that attitude of Marcus Garvey, that stand up on your feet and be ready to defend your manhood at all times.
And all of a sudden, this golden voice from the Caribbean came and stood on the corners in Harlem and began to talk about self-esteem, holding up your backbone, you know, no wishbones. And Mr. Garvey gave them hope that there was a dream for black people.
This had given the people hope. They were at this point hearing a new cry, the kind of cry that somewhere basic in their souls have been yearning for a very long time. It was indeed the voice of liberation, one of great reason.
Garvey took black folk who were assaulted by a variety of very unfortunate and negative images of themselves and made them believe in themselves, made them see physical beauty in themselves, made them see the need to interpret and write their own history. In that sense, Garvey sold the Negro to himself.
When he spoke, it was as if you were speaking yourself. It was not like somebody speaking to you, but like he was you, or you was he. And it just was a connecting link, and it was something like fire, like lightning, like something that went through everybody at the same time.
Garvey was well-researched, self-taught, a great deal fearless, and outspoken. He had already begun his tour by this time and had begun spreading his message zestfully. Garvey told black Americans that their history did not begin with slavery. Africa's glorious past was also theirs to claim, he said, and people who had once done great things could do them again.
Be as proud of your race today as our fathers were in the days of yore. We have a beautiful history, and we shall create another in the future that will astonish the world. I can advise no better step toward racial salvation than organization among us. We have been harassed, trampled upon, and made little of because of our unfortunate condition of disorganization. Our racial program of today is a united, emancipated, and improved people.
Garvey had indeed cried, in many words not easily forgotten.
I have come to the conclusion that the Negro race can only save itself when there is a free and independent Africa, because, I repeat, it is not philosophy that rules the world. It is power, human force, I mean strength, that rules the world, and the race and nation that has that is the race and the nation that is supreme. Give power to Black Africa, and we become masters of the destinies of man. And that is what we want, and that is what we must get if we are going to survive.
That was it. Power would enable black men and women to redeem themselves and their continent, and achieving this power was the first step in the process of redemption. But power, Garvey recognized, required economic support. Such economic and financial development was also primary in Garvey's vision for the Universal Negro Improvement Association, the UNIA.
The UNIA was brought into being for the purpose of helping to develop the financial condition of our people and placing us in a position to control the industries we want.
That was Garvey yet again talking.
If every division of the UNIA all over the world with 1,000 members in each division would carry out this system, do you know what would happen? In the space of 2 years, the parent body would be able to control between $1 billion and $2 billion. We could force legislation. We could do anything. If you develop a strong financial power, you will control the politics of the country. You will control legislation. And if you can control legislation, you will control the government, and you will get all that you want.
With 35 cents, a photograph, and a pledge to support Garvey's nation-building program, any person of African descent could join the Universal Negro Improvement Association. Garvey's genius was to transform cooks, maids, and workmen with the pride that comes with a title and a uniform. Always think yourself a perfect being, he wrote, and be satisfied with yourself.
You would almost see them metamorph into something else. You would see it. They'd suddenly get very tall. Because the smallest man in the uniform still looked like a giant. I can tell you that from experience. They were gorgeous. The black men were gorgeous.
One uniquely brilliant human breed this was. The man, Garvey, had a clear vision of just how to go about the Black Revolution in question, and he was not without some productive strategies, and they were all very workable. The UNIA had something for everyone. For men, there was the African Legion for young people, there was the Juvenile Division, and in the Black Cross, nurses and the Universal Motor Corps. The Garveyan movement even offered Black women a dignified place of their own.
We wore this uniform everywhere. That was a physical statement that these uniforms and plumage made to the rest of the world, that we are Garveyites and proud of it.
This was an excellent revolutionary organization for Blacks. It carried every Black American. Everyone was involved. Jacob Samuel Mills, a master carpenter from St. Kitts, had come to Harlem in 1910. But barred from the all-white carpenters union, Mills could only find work as a janitor. Here's what his daughter had to say.
My father joined the Garvey movement because he thought it was something for the advancement of Black people. And every Sunday afternoon when he was through with his work, he would put his uniform on. He felt very proud when he wore that uniform. He would wear it on the trolley car and let everybody look at him and talk if they wanted to talk. But that was Captain Mills.
The effect of the uniform on everyone who saw it was electrifying, but especially on white people. I heard white women fainted. When we had the big parades going down Fifth Avenue, they would just fall out.
The Black Pride had been firmly established by the establishment of the UNIA. Members pledged allegiance to the red, black, and green flag, which Garvey himself had designed as a symbol of a Black nation in the making.
Show me the race or the nation without a flag, and I will show you a race of people without any pride. But that was said of us 4 years ago. They can't say it now.
Ethiopia, the land of our fathers, thou land where the gods love to be, as storm clouds suddenly gather, all armies come rushing to thee. And then the chorus went something like that. Advance, advance to meet the foe, let Africa be free. That's, women would sing that and the men would reply, advance, women, advance to victory. Men, advance, advance to meet the foe, advance. And everybody, with the might of the red, the black, and the green, advance. With the might of the red, the black and the green.
In the summer of 1918, Garvey set out to create a separate economy of Black-owned businesses. First, he had purchased a half-finished church building for use as UNIA headquarters and precincted Liberty Hall. Relying on the printing skills he'd learned as a boy, Garvey started the Negro World newspaper with a cover price of 5 cents. The paper carried essays, articles and poetries, and Black history and world events. On the front page of every issue was a long editorial penned by Marcus Garvey himself. He distributed the paper with the help of Amy Ashwood, who had made her way to New York a year earlier. Then, to attract the dollars that flowed through Black hands, Garvey created his first of many investment funds.
Garvey was aware that Blacks had contributed to the war effort by purchasing over $220 million worth of Liberty bonds. And this contribution to the war effort indicated that there was some wealth within the Black community in the United States. And his idea was that this Black wealth should be converted into businesses that would benefit Blacks and projects that would benefit Black people.
Garvey's idea of the UNIA was that it would teach success. It was going to be a vehicle to communicate and demonstrate that Black people could be successful. This idea of success was now translated into a whole series of commercial ventures. Laundries, restaurants, newspapers.
Toward the end of achieving economic support for his vision, Garvey established the Black Star Line in June 1919 to operate a worldwide network of steamships. Emulating the successful white-owned steamship companies, Garvey's plans for the Black Star Line included providing passage for blacks to the reclaimed homelands in Africa, providing a financial base for support of the UNIA movement, and earning respect for black enterprises through a successful showing of the UNIA flag. Garvey offered shares of stock in the new company at $5 per share, and within a year, the line had raised $610,000 and owned 3 ships. This was a huge success in motion, but some things were at stake. UNIA businesses had begun to flounder, as Garvey was into hiring managers with little or no experience. Not that he could be blamed for this. Blacks knew so little then, or knew nothing at all. As a consequence, Garvey was known to shifting funds from one company to cover the mounting losses accruing in another. Even if the business practices of the Black Star Line's officers had been above reproach, the corporation still would have had great difficulty keeping its flag above water. And why? Its unwise purchase of dubious ships at exorbitant prices was a handicap from which even a more soundly managed company would have been hard put to survive. The thing was, Garvey needed more minds like himself on the table. There's no way to succeed for long with all the antagonisms and hate games going on, from the American government, worse still, from his own people. With the Black Star Line, Garvey's own star rose and fell. Rather than providing a financial base for the UNIA, the Black Star Line succeeded in draining the UNIA's assets, dragging the organization's other operations under with it. Garvey was forced to sell off property and equipment. Beset by problems, both internal and external, Garvey attempted to keep his fledgling steamship line afloat through the sale of more stock. This sale of stock, or more precisely Garvey's stock solicitation through the mail, led to his arrest, conviction, and eventual deportation for mail fraud. Garvey was indicted on 13 counts of mail fraud in February of 1922. However, the indictment and subsequent trial are not isolated events. They must be viewed in the historical context of Garvey's struggle with the existing power structure. There are several aspects of the trial, and the circumstances leading up to it, that illuminate a discussion of the power phenomenon. Number 1, the atmosphere of hostility surrounding Garvey before and during the trial. Number 2, the extensive government surveillance Garvey was under, surveillance that shaped the outcome of the trial. And 3, whether or not Garvey received an unbiased, fair trial. Garvey's indictment coincided with a vigorous "Garvey must go" campaign. This was even spearheaded by several prominent Negro leaders who vehemently opposed Garvey's programs for no justifiable reason, although the attack centered on the allegations that Garvey was a charlatan bent on milking the poor, ignorant masses of black people. Garvey's own mismanagement of the Black Star Line and his overly optimistic declarations of how close the race was to achieving the repatriation of Africa fed the "Garvey must go" hysteria. Garvey also became the black media's target for character assassination. W.E.B. Duboy, a black man with his political influence at the time, who could have joined forces with Garvey for the betterment of blacks, whose liberation he claimed to champion, was in the forefront of the campaign against Marcus Garvey. He had written an article critically evaluating the Black Star Line's finances, questioning the existence of worthless ships, and calling to task the habit of selling passenger tickets on non-existent ships scheduled to sail to Liberia. Dubois accused Garvey of robbing his investors, dishonesty, a lack of knowledge and experience, and of using the mails in furtherance of a scheme to defraud and conspiring to do so. And the talk about Liberia, this clearly had to do with sabotage. Dubois had played a glaring role in this, which makes some wonder now what Dubois' true motive or ambition for black Americans had been all along. Dubois was from a more privileged background and felt he could improve the condition of African Americans by working with liberal whites in the U.S. through the organization he co-founded with whites in 1909, the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. The NAACP was meant as a civil rights organization championing liberation and equality for people of color. But come to think of it, how could the NAACP have functioned in tune with the black dream if it was controlled by several wealthy whites in the background? Garvey, on the other hand, grew up in an impoverished Jamaican community. He believed in blacks helping blacks without any dependence on whites. This he'd always known to be true liberation. The philosophy of both men differed. Garvey would recall how his disappointment was offset by the peculiarity of what he had witnessed in the NAACP offices when he went visiting Duboy to personally invite him to one of his events. The stark absence of colored staff among the officers of a supposedly colored organization was troubling. Garvey claimed to have been perplexed and unable to tell whether he was in a white office or that of the NAACP. All these put together would hurt Dubois, no doubt. For a fact, he was the director-in-front and editor-in-chief of NAACP's monthly magazine, The Crisis. For Garvey, whites would never come to accept blacks, and thus he proposed that black Americans return to Africa, where they would live as part of a majority population and perhaps have real political power. Dubois felt that Garvey's program of complete separation was a form of surrender to white supremacy and threatened the gains made by the NAACP. Several top reporting agencies at the time had reported this. It wasn't so much of a hidden agenda that Dubois had played a major role in the downfall of Garvey's Back to Africa movement, through which Garvey was trying to arrange for black Americans to leave the U.S. and relocate to the West African country of Liberia. Garvey's initial plan was to send a limited number of African Americans, 20,000 to 30,000 families at first, with skills, professions, and capital to settle in Liberia. With Liberia having economic trouble due to corruption and mismanagement, Garvey had launched the Liberian Construction Loan Program, from which he successfully raised a $2 million fund, which he offered the Liberian government in exchange for the settlement of his people there. This happened in 1921, October 17th. The Universal Negro Improvement Association, UNIA, had a large and growing presence in Liberia already. High-ranking members of the government and ordinary Liberian citizens were members of the UNIA or followers of Marcus Garvey, including former Presidents Arthur Barkley and Daniel E. Howard. Then-President Charles D.B. King had welcomed the UNIA to Liberia and invited it to establish headquarters in the country. This would mean that the Liberian government and Marcus Garvey were already in good rapport and working together towards fulfilling the goal in sight. Liberia was selected as the base for the establishment of the great African nation. Garvey envisioned the West African nation as the rightful home of those wanting to return to Africa. Jamaicans.com had reported thus: Garvey wanted to settle in Liberia before white nations of Europe robbed Liberia of its autonomy under the guise of friendship. Meanwhile, Dubois had maneuvered through his high-powered contacts to get himself appointed Ambassador Extraordinary of the United States so he could attend the second inauguration of Charles King as the President of Liberia. During this time, Dubois developed a relationship with King. Shortly after, the experts and engineers of Garvey's UNIA would, as planned, arrive in Liberia to prepare for resettlement, and were immediately deported on the instruction of Liberian President Charles King. This was clearly unanticipated. The new Liberian president had no doubt been influenced by his new acquaintance, Dubois. The slave rebellion reported thus: the inviolable truth is, Dubois had worked very closely with the U.S. State Department to destroy the UNIA movement in Liberia and had taken steps to hamper the construction and resettlement plan. The more complicated truth, which was also known, has less to do with Americo-Liberian hegemony than a curious combination of French, British, and American interests in Africa. This, the Liberian listener reported. All the powers then were against Garvey's mission and would do anything to quash it. All kinds of schemes had begun to come into play. In a New York News editorial, Garvey was accused of playing on the prejudice and imagination of blacks and having seduced from them hundreds of thousands of dollars and squandered upon self-glorification and visionary projects. The editorial referred to Garvey as a despotic dreamer and a menace to his people and the United States, who was not only bankrupting his race, but fast leading it to untimely bloodshed and suicide. Additionally, in the white media, Garvey was portrayed as a racial agitator, stirring up hatred against whites. Still another major line of attack focused on Garvey's plan to send black people back to Africa, which was portrayed as a foolish effort to get back to the jungle. A.P. Randolph ridiculed Garvey's scheme of conquering Africa for Negroes, declaring that the Garveyites had neither the brains nor the capital to run a steamship line, much less build an empire. All these were done to simply discourage and thwart a life-changing phenomenon which was already in movement. There were also forces at work to destroy the Black Star Line. Corrupt UNIA officials received kickbacks from the ship owners who sold Garvey overpriced, ill-repaired vessels. When the ships were put out to sea, Black Star Line crew members sabotaged the vessels, the cargo, and the ship's sailing itinerary. Garvey had said on this regard,
The troubles we have had on our ships has been caused because men were paid to make this trouble by certain organizations calling themselves Negro Advancement Associations. They paid men to dismantle our machinery and otherwise damage it so as to bring about the downfall of the movement.
In other cases, Garvey was known to have said that his failed Back to Africa plan was because of a plot against him by lighter-skinned black people colluding with whites. He had concluded thus in the editorial of the Slave Rebellion Report.
The enemies of colonization of Africa were led by very light-skinned Negroes under the leadership of Duboy because the black leadership and politicians and those of the white race who wanted to discredit and imprison me to please their Negro political wards and foreign power tried to make the plan unpopular and unsuccessful.
Additionally, several state corporation commissions concerned themselves with Garvey's compliance with state securities laws. Garvey entered a guilty plea to the charge of violating the Illinois Blue Sky laws and was fined $100. Garvey was also investigated by the Virginia State Corporation Commission. Garvey was in hell, bloody hell. Everywhere was a trap, set to catch the promising leader of the Black American future. The United States government conducted an extensive and detailed investigation of Garvey's activities. One FBI agent's report stated that Garvey was, without doubt, one of the worst insiders in the United States today, among the Negroes who would do almost anything for him. If there should be any race trouble in New York at any time, there is no doubt that Garvey was sowing the seeds now for it. The scope and reach of the surveillance network was staggering. Garvey's activities were initially brought to the government's attention by the American Protective League, a citizen vigilante group set up to hunt for communists. The United States Military Intelligence Division began charting Garvey's activities and scrutinizing the content of his speeches to ascertain what type of threat he might pose to the government. This effort, coordinated with the British Military Intelligence Division and the United States Diplomatic Service, with the aid of the U.S. Postal Censorship Committee, which provided a means by which Garvey's international mail could be scrutinized, provided an international intelligence gathering mechanism which could monitor Garvey and the UNIA's activities throughout the world. J. Edgar Hoover originally began his observations of Garvey because he was considered an undesirable alien. In 1919, all aliens were under suspicion as communist infiltrators or sympathizers. Garvey's speeches were also scrutinized to determine whether he was in violation of the Sedition Acts. After Garvey was determined not to be a communist, the surveillance effort was classified as an effort to gather information on Negro agitation or Negro radicalism, for which the government set up a special investigation section. Various government agencies regularly investigated black individuals and organizations who spoke out against racial discrimination and injustice. The U.S. government at this point had no issues with assuming, readily, that Garvey's business program was a fraud. Government surveillance reports discussing the investigation of the Black Star Line described Garvey as a get-rich-quick artist. Blacks who opposed Garvey painted him as a con artist, and statements to this effect were made to government agents and black publications. A significant portion of the intelligence on Garvey was gathered by blacks who were either agents, informants, or UNIA infiltrators. These men were instructed to circulate among the various communities where unrest was being reported among the Negro population. They were to remain long enough in each community to determine for themselves what the real trouble was, and then by conversations and formal talks in Negro churches and other meeting places to persuade the Negroes in the community that the actions being suggested to them by persons who had previously circulated among them would lead to very serious consequences, if not abandoned. Garvey and his followers had become aware that there were blacks who were spying on their organization and made some attempts to identify those persons.
You know, in times of war, we usually shoot spies. And it would be a good thing if for some reason the Negroes could get rid of the spies, of his writing and telling everything to the white man. If there is a Negro in this house who has been here for that purpose, if he attempts to report the speech, you would do yourself credit to simply report the same to us.
However, forces from within, as well as without, would undermine the UNIA and hasten its decline. Every aspect of Garvey's business operations was under strict scrutiny. Through UNIA informants, the government had secured the minute details of the Black Star Line's financial affairs. Agents of government intelligence knew in advance when Garvey or UNIA representatives would be embarking on a Black Star Line promotional tour, and agents faithfully recorded every success and failure. Whereas Garvey wasn't actually doing these things as a hidden agenda, as it is neither criminal nor illegitimate to want what's best for oneself and one's people. When Garvey attempted to buy more ships, a broker, conspiring with a top UNIA officer, embezzled thousands of dollars in deposit money. As a result of this theft, J. Edgar Hoover advised the U.S. Shipping Board, from whom Garvey had attempted to purchase the ships, not to sell anything to Garvey, and forced the Shipping Board to renege on a contract for sale. These acts greatly undermined the financial integrity of the Black Star Line. It moreover undermined the confidence UNIA members placed in Garvey's vision of a redeemed race. However, an overwhelming majority of the fiercely devoted UNIA membership still believed implicitly in its martyred leader and accepted unquestioningly his bitter account of the dishonesty and treachery that caused the downfall of the Black Star Line. Garvey's conviction must be examined in terms of the substantive elements of mail fraud. In order to secure a conviction for mail fraud, the prosecution had to prove that the defendant, 1, had the intent to defraud, 2, had devised a scheme or device to defraud, and 3, made use of the mails in furtherance of his scheme to defraud. Paradoxically, although the government proved its case, Garvey was clearly not guilty. The trial court, the United States Attorney, the jury, the Circuit Court of Appeals, and the general public had assumed from the start, without proof, that Garvey's plans were fraudulent. An examination of the Circuit Court's opinion makes clear that the only issue they felt called upon to decide on appeal was whether or not Garvey made use of the mails. This was the exact capital definition of prejudice. The sole motive here had been to destroy a life and world-changing vision for blacks, and that could not be destroyed unless Garvey was destroyed, nothing more. In closing, Garvey would always be remembered. His legacy would always be pure gold. Nothing in the world can change that. Garvey would always be one amongst many whose imprint could never be erased from the history of great men who walked the earth. That brings us to the end of yet another video segment. Like, share, and reach out to us in the comment section to share thoughts. Remember, we're always delighted to pick from them. Subscribe to join us fully in the ride. We are very pleased to do this with you. Thank you for watching.